Hello guys, this is Panzerspähwagen, and today's video is going to be a post-build review on this series of kits here, which is the ICM Panhard 178/AMD-35 Panzerspähwagen 204F. It's all the same vehicle in the end. It's a French armored car. ICM makes a number of different boxings of this, and they all share most of the kit. So this review should cover basically the whole series, apart from specific parts in the railway version. So this video is going to be a little bit different because I've actually filmed this in a few parts, mainly because the kit has a full interior and I painted and fully weathered that beforehand before sealing it up. As you can see, it's masked off. So I basically filmed a modular assembly post-build review, kind of like most of the way through, discussed how I built that, how that went together, and how I left it in those components for access to the interior. And then I filmed another part after I put the interior all together and painted and weathered it, and then I did a conclusion at the end with it all sealed up. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. Hopefully it will be helpful if you're interested in building this project, because this was definitely a very good kit, though I did explore some aftermarket options on this build as well. So here we are about 90% of the way through the build, and I'm showing you at this point so I can explain the interior, the modular assembly, and how I've done that, because I'm sure in the last shot the interior was pre-painted and masked off so I can paint the exterior and such. So the actual base kit itself, without any of the aftermarket I've added and such, it was, I'd say, about 5 or 6 evenings, each evening being an hour to 2 hours. So you can definitely put this thing together if you're doing it stock in a week, 10 hours or so. I'm not exactly the world's fastest builder either, but the base kit itself is pretty well detailed. It goes together well, it's not overly complicated, and you do have a pretty decent interior. However, I found it a little bit lacking in some regards, so I went ahead and I added 2 aftermarket sets, and I've also done a little bit of work, as you can see on the radios here. So first, let's look at the modular assembly and how I've put this thing together. So I've got the turret all on its own. I've got the roof all on its own. I've got the floor here with the radios separate for painting. And then I've got like the shell, and you can actually, because I've left some parts loose so it's actually flexible, I can actually basically pop this over the floor. It's not super easy, and that's why it's separate. I'm not going to mess around with it too much, but my plan is I'll be able to paint this all the white interior color. I can paint this the floor color, which will be dark, and I can probably do some hairspray chipping, and then essentially I just snap this on, and you can also then plop the roof on, and then I can mask it all off and paint the exterior. The turret is, of course, is much more simple. You just, like, not much of this can be visible, so I'll just paint it like this with the airbrush, and that should be fine. Now the interior itself is pretty well detailed out of the box. You've got the 2 driver stations, as you can see here, for the front and for the rear, and then the engine would go here, and they do give you an engine, but it's a little bit lacking. Like, it's just an engine without any real wiring or such, so I didn't bother, but it would go in this compartment here. So you do have an engine if you want to do it, but like I said, I don't care about that. The interior for the crew compartment is enough for me. There were a few pin marks, I'd say about 6 pin marks that were visible on the entire interior, which isn't bad. Like, it's kind of to be expected to have a few pin marks when you have an interior kit, because it's really hard to avoid that in some cases. But there were a lot more pin marks overall, but most of them are hidden quite well by the kit's engineering. Like, I'm sure you can notice that there's some pin marks down here, but that's actually hidden below the floor. There are pin marks also on the inside of these parts, which kind of go on, that's the wrong side, they go on here, and there's like a stowage compartment. So if you don't put stowage in there, you'll see those pin marks, but I'm going to put some stowage on there. So a few of the pin marks I filled with putty, a few of them I hid with some gizmology, just kind of adding bits and bobs to just cover them up because I'm lazy. And then I've also added some wiring and such, a little bit of PE and whatever. Now the upgrades for the interior was a set by CMK. It is this set here, there's your number, and basically it gives you an ammo rack for the 25mm gun. You get a bunch of the big drum mags for the machine guns, and then you also have mounts if you want to have spots where the drum has been used and it's no longer fitted And then lastly, you also get the shroud for the coaxial machine gun, which is very nice. So these are the empty drum magazine stowage points. They look quite good. And I've done a few of them here and there just to kind of make it look like, they've used some of their ammo, but they've still got some left over. And these holes are the other locations for the resin drum mags, which I've put over here. This will be easy for painting. These resin drum mags from CMK, they look really good, and they're much better than the plastic ones in the kit, which are a little less detailed. They also have a seam line, and the handle is a lot chunkier. So these resin ones are definitely an upgrade, and this isn't a very expensive set. Also, you really should get it for the 25mm ammo rack there, because this is the kit part, and it looks pretty terrible because they've had to kind of mold a big plug in the inside. It looks pretty crappy. So with the resin aftermarket part there, you can have it obviously looking a lot better, and you can put your individual shells in that are included in the resin kit. And the last thing that comes in that CMK kit is the coaxial machine gun shroud, which is right over here in the turret. Now I want to point out that the actual metal barrel comes from the other aftermarket set, but the shroud itself here is the resin part. You can see it's the gray resin, and it looks really good. So yeah, I think that set was like $12 or something. It was really cheap. It was less than $20 for sure, and it gave me much superior interior ammo detailing, like for that ammo rack, like I said, and not for all the pan magazines. So that's definitely worth it. Now the second aftermarket set I have added is the MR Model Bow. Maybe it's Mr. Model Bow, I don't know. So there it is, MR Model Bow, and it's set number that. It is the basically upgrade for the AMD-35. As you can see, there's a lot of leftover parts in here, and I didn't use them all because they give you like different options for viewports and different options for periscopes and such for like earlier versions of the vehicle, and I don't really need that for mine. They also do give you the same coaxial MG shroud in here, but it's not as good as the other ones, so I use the CMK part. And there's also some stowage in here, which I'm not going to use, so I probably use like half of the set. It's okay, it's still not a very expensive set. And again, I think it was worth it for the upgrades to the kit, which I'm going to point out now. So you get the option for the initial type of exhaust there. You have much more detailed headlights on the front here, which actually have headlights, in the bottom. The kit parts are just like the shroud, which is kind of dumb. Though I did have to do some filling on some of these parts because they weren't perfect. You have a much better horn, though I doubt you can see it under the wheel at the end. Got the antenna mounts here, which look really good. And probably the most important part is these guys here. Let me put the roof in place here. You can see how that goes around the driver's viewport. The kit part for these little guys sticking up there is molded onto the glasses plate here, and they're really crappy because of the way it's been molded. Because of the angles involved, when you're injection molding, it's much easier to work perpendicular to the direction of the mold, because obviously the mold has to go up and down to close and make the actual part. But since these are at a steeper angle, the bolt detail on them was very, very soft because of how the mold has to kind of close at an angle around it. Without slide molding, you can't get good bolt detail on parts that aren't perpendicular. So I just sliced them off and put on these little guys. Super easy, and they look much better. Additionally, you can also do the side viewports. So the side viewports come molded like this as part of the hull side. On this side, I actually sliced it off, and then I put on the resin part there, which looks pretty good, and then I had to kind of carefully scribe away the material to make that lip within the thickness of the side armor plate. I had to kind of scribe it back carefully and cut that lip into it, and then kind of scratch build it up here. But it took a little bit of time, and I think it's worth it, but I kind of felt done after this one, so I didn't bother with the other side. It is what it is, but I think that's a nice little level of detail there for sure. Now on the turret, you can see more parts from the resin MR Model Bow set. You got some viewports there. I plugged one of them. And you get the metal barrel for the main gun, which is excellent because the kit part is pretty weak. And it also gives you the coaxial MG barrel and also the shroud, but I used the shroud from the other set because it was better, like I said before. Additionally, the last thing that this set gives you that I used, apart from little bits and bobs of stowage, are these antenna mounts for the command variant, though I had to add these base plates on them. And I want to do the command version because it looks pretty cool, so I got these to upgrade the kit. Now back to the turret here, you can see I've done some extra work. First of all, I had to add these hinges on the back because they weren't properly molded, most likely because I bought the boxing that gives you the later version of this vehicle with different viewports, as you can see kind of on the front there and such. And then I guess because of the additional molding for that, this part wasn't completely molded, so I had to add the hinges on. But if you buy the boxing for the initial version and build it kind of as I have here, that's not an issue apparently. I also added some cast texture here because the kit part is all molded as one big solid piece, as you can see, when in reality this whole assembly here is actually a separate cast part which is bolted on. So I actually carefully scribed the line around the whole thing up over the top of the mantlet and such. And then I went in there with some Mr. Surfacer 500 and did a few layers of it, stippling it on and then sanding it back to give me a nice cast texture. And I also added a couple of numbers right there and such, and it looks very good. And I also added the same texture to the little port there for probably the gun sight, I guess. The last thing I did was I also kind of scratch built my own radio rack. The reason for that is the kit gives you a French radio, and I didn't care for it. It looked really crappy, and since I'm doing a German version, I thought, maybe they would have put their own radio in there. So I basically scratch built an FU5 and FU12, which is a standard radio, and then the command, not really a command, but more like a scout vehicle radio. It's kind of 90% right, though looking through the hatches, it's good enough for what you'll be able to see. So I scratch built the rack for them using some evergreen strip styrene, and then I also made the little connections using 10 thou and 15 thou styrene rod, warming it in my hands and just bending it and curling it with tweezers to get the nice draping of all the connections. And I looked up pictures for what port connects to which port, so it actually should be fairly accurate. And of course I have one power unit for each receiver or transmitter, so that looks pretty sweet. Hopefully it'll be visible through the main hatches at the end of the build. Alrighty, now I have actually painted the full interior and weathered it, and I've also finished the construction, which I think we'll look at the outside first, and then we'll move on to the interior in just a moment. So as you can see, I've added the wheels, and I've actually put the whole suspension on, as well as things like the front plate here, the flat plate, and the rear stowage bins, which I had to leave separate before to allow the the hull to kind of flex open like that so I could snap it around the floor. Hopefully that makes sense. But once I painted the interior, I basically glued the whole thing together apart from the roof, which is still separate. And it looks very nice. The only things that are not on there right now are the two doors, as you can see behind me there, as well as the pan mags, which are going to go on the doors. I've also left off a piece of stowage here. Let's talk about the stowage first. So I did buy some more aftermarket sets. The two aftermarket sets we looked at before, the CMK set for the interior, I think is definitely almost mandatory if you're doing the interior. And then the MR model bow set for the exterior is kind of like a nice to have, but not really necessary. The stowage set here is definitely not something you need to get. It is the Panzer set for the vehicle here. As you can see, it comes with a bunch of stowage. I'm only going to use a few pieces of it. The other ones are pretty generic, and I can put them on other projects in the future. But I'm basically just going to use the one on the back, and then this one over here for the stowage bin. So the rear one here will go on. It just kind of perfectly fits on there. It's very well engineered. Panzer Art stuff is usually good, apart from that Panzer III sandbag set that was a disaster. And then, of course, we also have this part here. So I can actually have it separate for painting, and then I can pop it in there because it's a very snug fit. Well done. On this side, I'm actually using the MR model bow stowage piece. And by using the stowage pieces there, I don't have to fill the pin marks that were on the inside of those parts as I showed earlier. I've also mounted the antennas. I talked about them earlier, but they look really good now with the base plates I added, which didn't come with the kit. They just wanted you to mount these right on the fender, which is wrong. And I actually have the antennas mounted in there. I drilled little holes, and I will leave them separate now so I don't break them, because I'm definitely going to knock them off when I paint it. The wiring from the actual radio antenna mounts to the I guess the sockets for the mounts to the interior, is done the same way as I did on the radios. I just use some 10 thou styrene rod, warm it in my fingers by rolling it, and then take my little tweezers and I can actually coax it and make a bunch of very small bends, which gives almost like a curved effect to make these cables kind of drape and go across the vehicle as they appear to in reference photos. I'm not sure why there's actual little insulators on the fenders, if you also notice that they just also touch the fenders, but I don't know. That's just how it is. And by the way, those are just German standard 3-meter antennas from Elephant Model Corporation. This other set from CMK, which is another set to match the other one before, this is the exterior set for the wheels. And you don't really need to get this as well, much like the Panzer set. The kit wheels are fine, but these resin ones are a little bit more crisply detailed maybe, and they also come with, like the flat spots on the bottom. And they also kind of bulge out a little bit. You'll also notice that I have actually steered the wheels a little bit to one side. That was done simply by gently warming essentially like the axles or whatever, so that I could actually just kind of bend them, because it's all just one big axle across, when in real life it of course is a steering unit there. So I found the point where it would actually have a linkage in real life, warmed it with a lighter very carefully, and then just kind of coaxed it. And I did it very carefully in a few attempts because I didn't want it to get really like soft and just sag and then destroy the whole thing. So that's a standard technique there, but it's a little bit tricky, so you got to be careful. All right, now the interior. As you can see, I have fully painted and weathered this, and it looks really good. Hopefully I mask it off properly and don't ruin it when I paint the outside. Basically, I painted the shell, like I showed earlier, the walls and the roof, with a mix of AK Real Color RAL 8020 and white, just to make an off-white color. And then the floor was a mix of Tamiya dark royal blue and black, so it just became a very dark bluey gray. I did a little bit of hairspray chipping. As you can probably see, there's some scrapes and scratches here and there, especially around this area here. You can definitely see them quite well. And then I supplemented that with a little bit of sponge chipping with AK Basalt Gray. They're very standard techniques I've shown in many videos before. And then, of course, I've also got my radio rack here, which looks really nice. Let's pull that out and take a look. So I'm really pleased with how this came out. I found a bunch of photos online of all these radios. Again, when I did the research for the wiring, essentially. I will link the website I used in the corner here for you guys. Very useful for references of the look and the configurations of these radios. So I've got the standard radio there, the FU5, which I've done in the gray. The transformers are just kind of in various greens, like a field gray and a Russian green, just for a bit of variation. Receiver and the transmitter for the FU12, I've done in a little different colors just because there's some variation you can see in real life and I want to make it look a little bit interesting. I applied some decals for some lettering. That's actually markings for Panzerfausts, but it's so small you can't even read it, so it just looks like generic red writing, which is what's on these things. And they look really sweet. And then I've just done a little bit of like dry brushing and dusting with some pigments to make them look dirty to match the inside of the vehicle there, and then also sponge chipping. Taking another look here, you can see my weathering of the floor, which was just some generic AK washes like, dust effects, Kursk earth, and so on. I also applied a pin wash of brown oil paint. Very, very generic stuff I've already showed before. I will do a full interior painting video soon on a Panzer 38T that I'm working on as well. The last thing I want to point out here are the shells for the 25mm gun. I painted them with AK RAL 8020. Did some dry brushing with light grays and whites to give them some variation. And then I actually applied the AK True Metal bronze polishing compound, I guess it's the best way to describe that. You kind of rub on there and then you can actually polish it to make them have a metallic sheen. I only had that bronze color, which is a little bit dark, but it does the trick. Maybe if I had like a brass or something, that might look a little bit better, but I'm pretty happy with it. The pan magazines I just airbrushed with a black, and then I gave them some progressive dry brushings with lighter and lighter grays. Nothing really special there. I might go over with some metal pigments on the ones on the doors because they're more visible, but I think they definitely look good enough. The interior I'm very pleased with. And of course I also did the interior of the roof and then the interior of the turret. Just really basic because you can barely see any of it, but it's got to be done a little bit. Alright, now let's wrap up this post-build review. I've only done a couple of things since the last video, and that is I've put on the rear view mirror, which I had forgotten about. And the more eagle-eyed of you may have noticed that I actually had two of the wheels on backwards in the last shot, which would be these two rear corner and the front corner here. I didn't realize that they actually had a tread pattern that wasn't symmetrical, so I had basically these two reversed, and then on both ends, if you looked at the wheels, one had tread pattern going the opposite way, so I had to rip it off, and that wasn't too hard. With some CA debonder from VMS actually really helped me to soak in there and take it off. I'll show you here. The wheels are actually separate for painting, and they basically go onto these plastic hubs that then go on the axle in the kit, which is actually pretty convenient for me to leave them separate for painting, but also have them glued onto something that mounts pretty solidly to the axles. And I've also, of course, masked off the interior. As I've discussed, the kit was very good, very well detailed. It was lacking in a few spots, which was definitely fixed by the interior CMK set. If you're going to build this kit and do the interior, I basically say that you really should get that CMK set because it's really good. The exterior MR model bow set is also very good, but not required, but it has some good detail. And then the stowage set from Panzerspähwagen and the resin wheels are just nice to have, but definitely not required if you're doing this build. And in terms of the build itself, really the only issues I had were the mismolding of this turret, because I bought the kit that had the other turret included, which made this basically a short shot. Not an issue on the standard boxing. I had to add the cast texture there. And I had a one fit issue with this kind of rear stowage bin, how it was supposed to go together. It didn't quite line up properly, so I just kind of battle damaged it, bent it up a little bit, and that has solved the issue. But overall, this is a great kit. I highly recommend it. Like I said, it was a very quick build. Out of the box it would be like 10 hours, and it was enjoyable because it wasn't really frustrating. Maybe the most annoying thing was that I had to fill or cover about 6 pin marks, but you know, it's an interior kit that's to be expected. So I do definitely recommend this kit. They have a few different boxings of it. There's French, German versions. There's a railway version. There also is a French command version, which does have these radios, but I'm not sure they look quite as good as the MR model bow set ones do here. So that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments about this project, please feel free to post them on below. I always read through them all. And if you like my work, you can support me with Patreon. There will be a link on screen for that now, which is a website where you can give me a little bit of money every month, and you can get early access to my videos and some behind-the-scenes photos on updates on projects and stuff like that. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and goodbye.